Hi, we're here to talk about Liverpool's Dream, which took place between the 4th and the 7th of October 2018. My name's Jen Faulding. I was project manager on the event, and I've got 23 years of event and project management experience across sports and cultural events, including European Capital of Culture in 2008, Sydney Olympics, Manchester Commonwealth Games, and the 3 Giants events.
Hi, I'm Sue Lees. I was the event manager for the Giants project in 2018. I come with a background of 20 years in the event industry, having worked for Capital Culture with Jen, and currently co-head up the major events programme for Culture Liverpool. We do all kinds of events from Liverpool Sound, Liverpool International Music Festival, and Liverpool Homecoming Parade.
Good morning, I'm Mark Morgan, a superintendent with Merseyside Police. I've been a police officer for almost 30 years, and I was the event police commander for the Giants. I've got extensive experience of policing events, which we'll come on to the next slide, and that I've been throughout my policing career.
And good morning, I'm Superintendent Jonathan Davis, also from Merseyside Police. I was Bronze Commander, which is the ground commander for the event. Again, like Mark, I've got extensive experience in sporting events and so on, this was a great event for us to go to. And that moves us on to the first of our slides, which is in relation to ground command. So we put some images up here of events within Merseyside and beyond, which we were all involved in. So just picking a few out, Mark and I are both worked in the Met at some stage in our career, and we did Notting Hill Carnival, which is shown on there. You've got the Homecoming Parade, again, a very resource intensive but excellent event put on the city. Aintree, Jen and myself have both been in command of Aintree at various times in our career. Below that, you've got the 3 Queens, which was Mark and Sue, delivered that for the city. At the bottom right, you've got Liverpool Pride, a massive event in all cities, but particularly Liverpool, and again, Mark has been commander on that. To the left, you've got the Drift Shifters, which was another Liverpool event. Above that, you've got a march that we host now and again within the city, again, quite in relation to command. And the others are images. You've got Limp Fair, you've got the City of Light, the River of Light Festival. So these are all the events that we've got experience in within the city in our own careers, which we think is important to bring to your attention when we go through these slides.
So now getting on to the Giants event. The Giants are owned and designed by a company called Royal Deluxe. They're the world's leading street theatre company, and they're based in Nantes in France. These Giants have been seen by across 5 continents since 1993. So 22.5 million people have seen these Giants and have a really special relationship with Liverpool. It's really important to Royal Deluxe that the art is free and accessible to everyone, and at no point are we allowed to charge for any part of this event. It's our job to bring their creative story to life, and we have they really do believe these Giants are real, and it's really important that they bring joy to the city that they come to.
Okay, so we mentioned that Culture Liverpool, Liverpool City Council brought Royal Deluxe back to the city for the 3rd time. We're the team that delivered European Capital of Culture in 2008, responsible for city events, tourism, city halls, film office, crews, funding arts organisations and marketing and commercial. In the last 7 years, to give you a background of what we do and who we are, we've had 31 major events attracting more than 9.7 million attendees, which obviously is bringing a huge amount into the local economy, over 301 million. And as we've mentioned, this is a trilogy, the Giants were. We've done the visit of the 3 Queens, you've just seen on a previous slide. And then we do annual events like Liverpool International Music Festival, Mersey River Festival and River of Light. And then toll ships have come several times to Liverpool itself.
Folks, in terms of Merseyside Police, to provide some context prior to going on to the next few slides that provide the background to the Giants events, we were invited by the Liverpool Culture Company to support them about 16 months out from the event. And it's important to note that in difference to previous Giants events of 2012 and 2014, the role of the police had changed in that time. Whereas historically we'd pretty much look to take over in some ways and take charge of planning events. That is very much an event organiser's responsibility these days, and the role of the police is quite specific in terms of our sort of training and guidance, being to prevent crime and disorder, to prevent a breach of the peace, certain traffic regulations, and then clearly contingencies and coordinating any response to sort of major incidents. So we'll come into this in more depth as we continue talking, but for me, as the Silver Commander, it was really, really important to have a team built around me that were suitably equipped and experienced, suitably credible to deal with the complexity of this event and the spin-off events effectively that fall out of it. So we'll come into that in more detail in a bit. And then pictured up on your screen there, on the left-hand side, is what we call the National Decision-Making Model. Now, I'm conscious some of you may be familiar with this, so I will whiz through it at some pace. This is the model that is what we call the Jessup model, the sort of blue light model that is openly available on the internet for people to see. So effectively the model that we work with is, if you start at the top in the red square, gathering information and intelligence, so that's me understanding absolutely all I need to about the event that we're dealing with, and then moving around into the green box, assessing risk and developing a working strategy, so that's understanding the sort of threats and the risks arising out of such an event, and developing a working or a best working strategy, whilst looking at the purple box, considering all powers, policies and procedures. So what does legislation, what does law tell me that we need to do? What does various guides in terms of event planning tell us that we need to do? And what does sort of local policies and procedures tell us? And that all informs our decision making. So having considered all of that, you're moving around into the blue box of identifying options and contingencies. And for me, the bit that's probably missing from this cycle here, from this model, is experience. And I strongly believe that personal experience from policing or from working events over an extended time period also informs your decision making. So then you move around into that orange box of taking action and reviewing it and effectively putting your plans into place. But it's a cycle that you continually go around as the information changes. So in the middle box there, in the middle pentagon, is working together, saving lives and reducing harm. For me, that's what I call the sort of tabloid test. That's the test that if our decision making were to be played out in the mainstream, in the media, would more often than not people think that we have come to the right decision and put the right practices into place. So clearly, whilst that's a sort of emergency service model, it's something that we regularly spoke to Jen and Sue about in terms of the planning of the event. And effectively, it's a model I think we probably all agree that we all work to in some form or other throughout the extensive planning process.
So we've mentioned a couple of times that this is the third of the trilogy. We first brought the Giants to Liverpool in 2012 for Sea Odyssey. That commemorated the sinking of the Titanic. 800,000 people came to visit on those 3 days, which brought in an economic impact of £32 million. We brought them back again 2 years later to do Memories of August 1914, which commemorated the start of World War I. Figures increased to 1 million people and £46 million economic impact. 4 years later is the event we're talking about today, and we brought 1.3 million people and over £60 million economic impact. And it's not just about economic impact, it's about international recognition and national recognition for Liverpool. And it's about community pride. It's about making sure that the people of Liverpool are engaged in these events and are part of these events and not for just visitors. Things that we can't show here are the fact that we know that drama students all put on their applications after 2012 that they wanted to come to Liverpool because we hosted events such as Giants. That gives 3 years worth of economic impact for those students, many of whom would stay in the city afterwards. We can't qualify that, but we do know that the impact of the events is far greater than the economic impact we see here. So what was Liverpool's dreams? What is on that screen is you'll see a YouTube link. And normally at this point when we do this presentation, you'd be able to watch a video and it really shows the emotion and the scale of the event. So I'm going to try and explain a little bit more about the event without showing the video. But it will be available when you get the recorded version in a couple of weeks to download. So you will be able to see the video, or you can go onto YouTube and have a look at yourself in advance of that. So cultural street theatre event, completely free, that took place over 4 days in Liverpool in 2018. It's created by Royal Deluxe, but delivered and produced by Culture Liverpool, with 4 marionettes walking through South Liverpool, Wirral and Liverpool city centre across a 1-mile route. The giants are manoeuvred by Lilliputians, and when you see pictures later on, the people in red suits, who some of which work for Royal Deluxe and some of which are local people who are trained to be Lilliputians. There's a few pictures here on the screen. The little boy giant is lying inside St George's Hall, where people were able to go and see him on day one and get up quite close. But he might just be lying there, but he's still breathing and still sleeping, so there's still some movement. We then go on to Princes Avenue, which is the next slide, which shows us going out into the communities. It's not just about staying in the city centre. We've got the giant on the raft in the docks. Because Liverpool's on the water, we use the water quite a lot, and that was the giant who'd arrived back from the Wirral. You can see the size of the giant there, with the Lilliputians talking to him. That's just before a scene with the fire brigade. You have Cholo being a little bit naughty, he playing with the motorcycle helmet, and then the little girl in the park. Again, we want to showcase our parks. It's really about the audience as well, though. The audience is for everyone. You know, local school children were able to come out. It's a school day. We've got the builders there on their lunch break. It's about families. It is absolutely about creating joy and enjoyment for everyone who sees them, and just letting them believe in the world of the giants.
Okay, so, you know, we've already said twice it's come to the city beforehand. So when we were looking at the 2018 planning, we've got lessons learned from previous shows. In 2012, it was really hard for everybody involved to understand what was coming to the city, to try and understand that these giant marionettes were going to walk through the streets and that huge crowds would actually be following them, was something that was a really hard concept to explain. You'll see further on that one of the premises of how the giants move is by hazard tape and volunteers. So there's no barriers anywhere for us to, manage the crowds. We thought about the route because of this, but what we didn't think about in 2012 was the movement between the crowds and the scenes in between where there's huge gatherings of people. That was something that we didn't actually look about. The stakeholders involved have been amazing in getting on board with the event, but they hadn't fully understood the scale. So I remember walking through the city streets after the giants, and there wasn't one chocolate bar, one bottle of water to be found, which was great, but there's also missed opportunities there that some businesses hadn't realised how much money and people would be in the city at that time. So in 2014, obviously there was an understanding of what was coming, the numbers of peoples, which did make, the planning process a lot easier. However, there's still things, that we would want to change in 2018. Some of the transport plans that faltered, for want of a better word, that was, huge volumes of people came into the city, and stakeholders did understand the event this time. And we realised that the scenes where the giants, are static, and like Jen said, where they're being fed water, or they have, they're being, fed food, or cholos playing, we needed to treat them as events in themselves. However, there's only so much we can plan for, and we did plan for the unexpected, but even the grandmother's head falling off during one of the parading scenes in 2014 caused immense issues and, during the actual show, because then Royal Deluxe worked incredibly hard to actually fix the giant as we were actually live on the show. But then it impacts all of the routes, all of the transport, the movement of people, and delayed us going into Newsham Park on one of the evenings. So it was one of those, there was so many lessons that we took away from 2012 and 2014, but even then, there was still so much learning that we knew we had to move forward for 18.
So the Giants have been to Merseyside 3 times, which is a great honour. It's the only host city within the UK, but it does do cities elsewhere. So you've got some of the difference, and we did some site visits here. So in Nantes, which is the hometown for the Giants, they don't have barriers, there's no road closures, they use fireworks and live animals. When they went to Mexico, they clear the streets using bulldozers and cash payments, so it's a bit more ad hoc than it is with the council there. The Havre, they closed the city down for residents 5 days before in 2016. Geneva, we did a site visit. There was 1,000 heavily armed police there. There was a large sterile area. There's some photographs that will be shown in just a moment. With sniper teams, we had a firearms aspect to our operation, but that was quite extensive what they did in Geneva. Leeuwarden, there was very narrow streets, not enough street furniture removal. But RDL don't want barriers, and they don't really want police. They want people around the event interacting with the event. But you see each country's got a different view on what is safe, how it can progress through the city, and particularly around the counter-terrorism aspect, which we'll just talk about in just a moment. But Liverpool's probably in the middle ground, but 2018 was different to the previous 2 years, as Sue has just said. So this was Geneva. Sterile areas closed down. I feel personally, having seen the Giants 4 times, that impacted on the event. It was just due to the security aspects. You've got their heavy police presence inside the convoy of armoured vehicles, heavily armed police officers to work together with this giant as it moves around the city. Outriders, police officers everywhere, and the bottom right-hand corner is a chicane they put in using HGVs. The threat to the mainland, to Europe, has been around momentum vehicle attacks, so that's vehicles driven into crowds, and that was what they put in to mitigate that. So having had a role in each of the ones in the UK, I can see the difference between the various changes and the ones they use in different countries. But it's interesting to note that during the planning phase, which was October 17 to October 2018, quite a lot of things happened in the UK. So we had the MEN attack in 2016, we had the Berlin Christmas Market attack in December 2016, we had the Nice lorry attack in July 2016, the Westminster terrorist incident in March 2017, Paris, the automatic weapon attack in 2015, there was the Las Vegas shooting, which, although it's a different continent, still impacted upon the threat assessment. We had the Borough Market mass knife attack in 2017. Plus, there was a rise in drones across the city being used at events. That changed quite a lot. We had acid attacks, if you remember. They happened a lot, particularly in the London area. So that was happening. And finally, the Provisional IRA popped up again, imposing another threat. So between 2012, when we had the Titanic-themed event, and 2018 with this event, the whole security picture had changed radically. And they were all the things that Mark, as Silver, had to bring into his plan. But it's important to note as well, we didn't lock down, we locked down the city on this occasion. We didn't use rolling road closures. So when we have marathons or whatever in the city, we sometimes use rolling road closures. We were really acutely aware of the impact that this event would have on the whole city, in that it largely in some areas was brought to a halt to allow the safe progression of this street art event.
Okay, so this slide is taken from our event management plan, and it was just so that we could try and illustrate the different people that are involved and were involved in all 3 of the Giants, and in particular 2018. The one benefit of Liverpool is that it's used to showcasing major events, and we are lucky in the fact that all of the stakeholders, the joint agencies involved, have worked with us and other event organisers to bring such spectacles to the city, and have been doing for 15 plus years. So there's a trust there, there's relationships already, which does help the whole planning process. So the big advantage we had in 2018, like we said, is that we had seen these Giants in the city in 2012 and 2014. As Jonathan's just said, though, we did take a slightly different approach in 2018 as to how we were actually going to deliver and manage the crowds and the actual movement of the Giants along the 21-mile routes. But this is how we kind of try to put a structure to the whole planning process and bring everything to life. We mentioned that it was really a 12-month planning process where it was incredibly intensive. But before that, we had Royal Deluxe visiting us twice before, each time for a week, where we were trying to basically map out the routes, map out the plan, and to get to the bottom of the story, really, as to how this is all going to be brought together. As I say, the planning process began a year out. That was through joint agency groups and then the safety advisory groups. What we did with this, though, because it was so intensive, was that we had project meetings every 2 weeks with the key stakeholders. That picture isn't staged. That picture is completely and utterly, we didn't know that was being taken. That's 2 weeks from the actual show itself. There was long days. We were in a porter cabin for about 4 weeks beforehand, and Royal Deluxe actually arrived 4 weeks before the event to actually come and start building and rehearsing on site. So everybody involved was actually on the rehearsal site for between 4 and 6 weeks. We had, project meetings every 2 weeks. That included our production team, event design, and the event safety shop, who were key to our planning process. The benefit we had with working with such companies was that they, again, had an understanding, having worked the 2012 and 2014 event, which there was so much learning that we could bring to the table. Bring that with the stakeholders and the joint agency group. That did help the planning process. Everybody kind of understood what was coming. What we did bring into the 2018 planning process was such things as risk registers, which we'll go through in more detail shortly. And we've mentioned that there was the familiarisation visits. That was really keen. There were people involved in the 2018 plan that hadn't seen the Giants actually physically move and work. We had a different security company, FGH, and so it was key that they came on these familiarisation visits with us so that they began to understand how the Giants moved and how we were actually going to have this show take place in the city. I've mentioned Royal Deluxe came to the city twice before, and again, we've already said that, you know, we were trying to deliver the artistic vision, but also within a safe environment and within the operating confines that we knew we had in the city centre and its infrastructure. So they were two very heavy trips, really, where there was a lot of planning and a lot of discussions that took place as to what we could actually achieve. The city partners we've mentioned, the city partners were absolutely key to bringing this alive. People like the METB, the Major Events Transport Board. Obviously, something like this, when we know we're going to get 1 million plus visitors, having the trains, the transport, the buses working, having the highways flowing. So there was a lot of discussions 2 years out about the roadworks that were going to be planned for the city, knowing what routes we could take, knowing how people would get into the city. And then, as we've mentioned, you know, a whole new aspect of 2018 was the Wirral, because we've been over there before with this event. So, you know, that was a whole new aspect of people. Jen did a lot of work, especially with the wedding and business engagement. So you can imagine we are closing down the city centre streets, and we had numerous weddings and numerous brides that we needed to actually get in place. In 2012 and 2014, we were talking 50 plus weddings. In 2018, it was 22. That's still 22 brides that we had to get to the church on time while we're bringing 1 million visitors into the city. So there was a lot of working with brides and wedding parties. But we have to say everybody got married on time. Nobody missed their wedding, and we actually did get invited to a wedding night do. And then finally, the independent safety plans. I've mentioned we worked with the event safety shop and event design to actually pull these plans together, which then we present and work with Mark and Jonathan on, in particular, about how we were going to move everything through the streets. But we'll go further on within the planning process. We'll take you through exactly what that meant in terms of events.
So in terms of policing, clearly my focus was on preventing crime, preventing any issues arising and contingencies should we get to the stage of sort of worst case scenario. Now bear in mind that this is against a backdrop of a changing counter-terrorism climate, changing threats that Jonathan's already detailed in terms of all the events that had taken place internationally in probably the preceding 2 or 3 years, and certainly since the previous Giants event in 2014. So that was, you know, a real sort of sea change in terms of our focus. And bearing in mind what I said earlier about the role of policing versus an organiser's responsibility. So in simple terms, it's not for us as the police officers to undertake core sort of security roles, which ultimately lie with security companies and the events organisers. However, there needs to be that balance, I'd suggest, in terms of being suitably engaged and suitably involved, so that the police are a deterrent and or best placed to be able to react to any evolving threats that may arise through such an event or events. So at the outset, I instigated what we call an ICP, an intelligence collection plan. So that considers everything from sort of local intelligence feeds through to, and again, considering the CT climate in particular, the counter-terrorism climate in particular, what the national threat picture tells us. So various forms of intelligence feeds, which in conjunction with a CT SECO, a counter-terrorism security coordinator, informs my decision making. And ultimately then I need to be able to trust the event organisers, Jen and Sue in particular, Clearly, I can't disseminate to them any confidential or sensitive information. However, I need to be able to tell them sufficient detail to inform their considerations and for them to be able to deliver a safe event, which is ultimately what this is all about. So, in fairness, it's right to say that our sort of levels of what people deem to be a proportionate response was the subject of much discussion, both within the police and then with partners, people having differences of opinion in terms of what's proportionate and what's not. And Jonathan just talked you through sort of what the findings we found in Geneva in particular, with the use of those lorries, the concrete bollards, etc. And ultimately, in terms of the event that we had in 2018, there was no bespoke threat to it. And we had to then, as event organisers and supporting the event organisers, consider our sort of tolerance to risk. And we had to, or the ladies had to implement meaningful control measures over in excess of 20 miles of route over the 4 days that you've heard about, but be proportionate as to what they want to do, so that we're not overly alarming the public and the normal communities going about their daily business, but equally affording them enough reassurance that they know that we're taking their safety seriously. It's fair to say that we probably in Merseyside found ourselves in a bit of a middle ground compared to what we'd seen in Leeuwarden and Geneva and what we'd learnt from other cities around the world. So myself and Sue as the event organiser had what we call an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, around who does what, who owned what in terms of events and the handovers in terms of contingencies. And I've detailed there on the screen the various policing options that were available to me from a policing command perspective. So Operation Exemplar, stroke Project Servitor, that's a scheme initiated by the CPNI, the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure. And Exemplar is effectively a tactic used by Merseyside Police and other forces where we conduct what we call influence activity deployments. So it's effectively using various tactics with the intention of deterring hostile reconnaissance. Effectively, it's getting into the mindset of a potential terrorist. So that's a tactic that we deployed around this event, but not exclusively to this event, so we wouldn't effectively mark it. We were doing that tactic just for the Giants. It was effectively marketed across numerous events, months preceding and post this event, so that they, effectively a potential somebody doing hostile reconnaissance doesn't think that we're just putting this tactic into place. It's a mainstream tactic that's always used. And then I had to factor in contingencies, effectively I wanted normal policing where we best could, but also I had to factor in contingencies around command roles in particular that we'll come on to in a bit, and then considerations from issues arising in the air, for example around drones. Jen's already talked about the amount of water that we had this event upon, so we had to think about scenarios around there. For example, worst case scenario, a raft sinking. We had to think of wind. Jen's already talked you through the size of these giants. Wind, the time of year that we did this in October, and the adverse weather was a real consideration for us. What would we do if one of these toppled over in terms of structures, be it the events, be it the giants themselves, or for example scaffolding on the routes. Extreme weathers in terms of cold. What happened if we had an extensive period of rain and freezing weather, and how would that impact upon the crowd, particularly considering it's a family event. What would happen if we had crime scenes in or around any of the routes, traffic accidents, and then sort of going worst case, off at a tangent, what happens if we had a terrorism type instance or a major instance such as flooding, which necessitates multi-agency responses. So you will see there that I had contingencies in place around roads policing, the marine aspect, public order, which we'll come back on to, and the link then to protest liaison on mounted assets for me. We had firearms response available to us and embedded within the policing plan. And then we had MASAT, which is a multi-agency scene assessment team. It's effectively a tactic available to me where the police, fire service and ambulance service pool resources together that are able to attend and quickly give a view as to what we're dealing with in terms of sort of a chemical or a biological instance. So that could influence quickly, for example, if we had a suspect package or a white powder instance on the route, as to are we dealing with a significant threat here that we need to really quickly and proactively deal with, or is it something that we are immediately comfortable with and effectively the event can carry on as normal. And then we had communications, obviously multifaceted, with media capabilities linked into the council culture company media, and clearly I had investigation and intelligence officers available to me.
As Sue said, it's a massive city-wide effort, this event, and without all of these city partners working together, this event could not happen at all. This is something we're very lucky to have in Liverpool. It's built up since the early 2000s, and every agency and partner has someone responsible for events in their organisation, and that for us works and is the reason why we're able to do these events. And that includes obviously the blue light services, Merseytravel and our regional transport partners. In fact, we were talking to Network Rail with Merseytravel 2 years out to ensure that the Lime Street closure happened at a time that didn't affect the Giants event, otherwise we couldn't have done the Giants event. And that had a knock-on impact on one piece of equipment that was needed for Lime Street closure that was also needed in other parts of the country at different times of the year, and we had to work together to get a date that worked for everybody. There were 55 partners in 2018 that had 330 users working on the portal that was managed by Event Design on our behalf. And as Sue said, we were also working with another local authority in Wirral across the water. So we were going onto their land, but working with their highways and cleansing and parks and parking services. So all of our city council departments and their city council departments all working together and learning from each other. So the Giants themselves, just a little bit, if you haven't seen the film yet, just to give a bit of size of scale. The little girl giant, the little boy giant, nearly 30 foot high and 800 kilograms. They're operated by 22 Lilliputians and can reach up to 2.5 kilometres an hour. You'll never see them together because they're actually operated by the same Lilliputians and the same machinery. We did have both in Liverpool, but the little boy giant had sailed off along the Mersey and along the docks, and then the little girl came and made a surprise entrance at the end of the event in 2018. The giant is 50 foot high, he's 2.5 tons, and he moves at only 1 kilometre an hour and needs 30 Lilliputians. And the Lilliputians are actually physically moving these giants. Cello the dog is the Liverpool favourite, everyone's favourite. He's only 9 foot tall, much lighter, but he can run up to 4 kilometres an hour, operated by 20 Lilliputians. We don't always know when that running is going to take place. So suddenly there's a movement within the Lilliputians, and the dog starts moving and moving at pace, which gives it a whole other dynamic to the event. So what do we need to think about when we're choosing the route? Well, clearly it has to tie in with Royal Deluxe's artistic requirements and the links to the story. We also need a corridor of 15 metres by 5 metres to actually physically move the giants along, and a slight gradient as well, because if it's too high a hill, the giants can't get up, and there are some hills in Liverpool. We clearly need to showcase landmarks around the city, and because this is the 3rd time we've done it, we needed to show different landmarks and different parts of Liverpool, but also we needed to make sure that Liverpool was recognisable on those pictures that go nationally and internationally. And show communities, because actually, if you're always in the city centre, then these giants always look big, but not massive. But if you show them against a terrace house, that actually really shows the difference. And also show areas that aren't yet regenerated. It's not about a city that's completely finished. It's about a city that still has areas of regeneration, and we want to showcase those because we want to enhance that opportunity for regeneration. We needed 20.6 miles, and we did have significant road closures. we had to go as far as removing BT lines, so that involved BT actually being there, ready, waiting for the Giants to head towards them, taking down the line. Giants goes past, BT line goes back up. But that does obviously have an impact on the city. It has an impact on businesses who you need to make credit card payments, phone calls. If you have residents who have emergency call buttons, we need to give them mobile phones to ensure that they still have the opportunity to contact people in an emergency. So there's a huge amount of consideration when we're looking at the route. What is the route that isn't going to cause the most disruption? We do need to take out traffic lights and street furniture. At one point in 2014, we were going to impact on 2 hospitals at the same time, and actually that meant that the city could be at risk if there was a disaster and needed to get people to hospital that had nothing to do with the event. So we had to talk to Royal Deluxe about saying, actually, no, that needs to change. We need to still have access to our hospitals. So, it was a working together to get that route. We were going to affect weddings, as Sue said. We can't predict what funerals we're going to have. But it's about making sure the hotels, the shops, the churches know about the event, that they can communicate with people who are coming to them to say, actually, be prepared. How do you get your staff into businesses if the roads and the public transport is very busy? Think about your staff times. Think about your bin. We talked to our council colleagues about bin collections. Do you really need your collections or your deliveries on that day? How are you going to get your stock in that you're going to need that stock? So it's about thinking about how it's going to impact on you, both positively and negatively. There are obviously court cases. We tried to avoid any existing roadworks, but clearly there were going to be roadworks that were going to happen, emergency gasworks, etc. So it's like that constant communication. And by using 2 routes where possible, it does disperse the crowds because it's not possible to see all of the show all of the time. It does allow that crowd dispersal.
So I've touched on this briefly already. So in terms of risk registers, it was absolutely important that we identified and mitigated against reasonably anticipated risks, and that what I deemed to be a risk in terms of police, bear in mind the intelligence feeds that I would be getting, mirrored and effectively merged with what the ladies were doing in terms of their risk register from an event organiser's perspective. And then it was important for me then that I had or was satisfied that the ladies had the key individuals and teams suitably engaged and available to us throughout the event. If we did have to respond to any form of major incident or an unusual type instance, that our responses would be effective. So folks, you can't see this, but you need to feel sorry for me for 2 reasons now. Firstly, I've just realised that the ladies have got some chocolate on the table here that they're not sharing with Jonathan and I. And then, more importantly, throughout this event, whilst Jen and Sue were very much focused, and Jonathan, on the Giants event per se, the structures that we, from a policing perspective, have in place effectively mean that, as the police silver commander, I was responsible for all events in Merseyside during that 4-day period. So clearly, the focus of my thinking was over an extended period attributed to the Giants. However, probably a few months out, we realised that we were going to have a Liverpool versus Manchester City football fixture falling on the Sunday of the event. Now, I'm not a football fan, but I was well aware that in the previous fixture between these 2 clubs, which was a cup match, there had been some disorder which had received adverse publicity. So I had to build in and factor plans that effectively allowed sort of the movement and the transition of resources between both events that they could flex if needed. And then on the screen there, you can see at the bottom left-hand pictures, we've got images of the Las Vegas shooting. Now that happened the weekend that we were in Geneva seeing or doing the recce for this event, and it really sort of focused our minds really in terms of particular the crowded places type threats and the climate that we were currently in. So, excuse me, on the right of the screen there, we're talking about the events that the police would lead upon, which includes international incidents and terrorist attacks, but also reads across to things like protests and demonstrations, which were very much part of what could have happened for us that weekend. Earlier on, you saw pictures, Jonathan introduced pictures of Irish parades. Now, there's only 2 or 3 cities or regions of the UK that is particularly pertinent to, but in Liverpool, they do attract a lot of how do I describe it? People, and certainly interest, and it's something that we didn't particularly want in tandem with the Giants event, but we did get notification that there was an intended parade at the same time and through the same venue as the Giants event. So we had to put measures in place to have that changed. Industrial action certainly came into it, as did other events that we will come on to shortly in the presentation.
Okay, so one thing that we identified was that whilst we were doing the risk register, there were some parts where mine and Jen's planning and Jonathan and Mark's planning collided, and we had to take joint responsibility. So Operation London Bridge is the death of the monarch, and it's something that within our resilience forums within Liverpool we have to plan for. We have to look at the major events calendar across the board for all events and look at, if the Queen did die, how would the city respond to this? And for us, we had to look at, would we still be moving forward with the Giants? So there's a lot of work that went into, in the background to things like that. We've mentioned that in 2014, we'd had some of the transport didn't work as well as we wanted within the city. So that was a lot of planning with the Major Events Transport Board to look at, the transport capacity and the crowd flows and how many people we'd be getting into the city at what times. And then industrial action. We've mentioned that we'd looked at the roadworks, we'd looked at Lime Street works, but then the one thing that was completely out of our control was industrial action. So, we did do all the consultation with stakeholders, but that was something that we just couldn't lead in any one direction. In terms of the Culture Liverpool lead, we were looking at such things that Mark's already kind of touched on in terms of the failure and collapse of event infrastructure. We've mentioned that the Giants are very susceptible to wind. So when we were looking at all the event planning, weather was a huge one for us, in particular lightning. We could pretty much, keep going, but if we had lightning and if we had really high winds, that was what was going to actually, put pay to the event having to be cancelled or postponed. And then, with things like that, you've really got to look at, what happens to the crowd, at what time would that happen. So we had many, many discussions about the impacts and the decision-making process that would happen behind all that. The budget shortfall for us was one thing. Obviously, we had a set budget which was funded by the City Region and the Arts Council, as well as, Liverpool City Council. So we had to look at all of that in terms of, what the Royal Deluxe team wanted. Obviously, last-minute requests were coming in, changes had to be made. There was quite a few dynamic decisions about the show made, but that was between myself and Jen to actually keep control of the budget. Mention weather conditions. And for us, the competency of producers and suppliers was absolutely key. I think I've already mentioned that the one benefit we had was that we had a lot of the same suppliers from 12 and 14, and that was absolutely invaluable to us, because what we couldn't have is companies going bankrupt or not delivering what we'd asked them to do. Host the city's capacity to host a number of attendees, we've touched on that already. And then we actually did look at, capacities and contingencies in the key people who are actually going to deliver this event. So between myself and Jen, we always knew that if one of us, for whatever reason, had to be taken out of the event, the other one could, take that place. And I know that obviously Jonathan and Mark had done a lot of planning in terms of their structure to make sure that could happen as well.
So tabletop scenarios linked clearly to the depth of the risk register that we've already talked about. And for me, I can't stress enough the value of independent testing of plans for an event of this scale, and indeed any other event. That includes testing of how the Category 1 responders, effectively the blue light services, integrate with other Category 2 responders, etc., in terms of worst case scenario. So we tested, we had a full day almost at this, where independently we were tested in terms of the weather that we've already talked about. And then moving across the top of the screen there, the loss of CCTV through to where we were situated in terms of event control at the JCC, which is our Joint Command Centre. Availability of staff falling off at the last minute. queues outside train stations, and that was very much learning from previous events. Failures of the crane and the infrastructure around the Giants, fires at or within the routes that we were to do, other events which were taking place, and then key threats around national threat level changes. So bearing in mind that in 2017 we'd gone to critical threat status a couple of occasions, and the implications of that in terms of losing staff or indeed possibly inheriting staff from elsewhere, depending on what the threat is. And then the vehicle-borne threat that we had seen internationally. So as I say, I can't stress enough the value of an intrusive tabletop to sort of really ascertain who owns what in terms of any of those given sort of situations. And it's really, really important and really valued here, the sort of input from all participants, but in particular some key individuals in terms of the event safety officers. So we had Simon James from TESS for this event, the security companies, which on this occasion was FGH, led by Lewis Walsh, and I think the ladies have already detailed the event design company, so they were absolutely key to huge facets of this operation. So for me, having tested numerous things, the biggest thing for me that was teased out of the tabletop exercise, probably by Simon, the event safety officer, was that the national message around run, hide, tell, in terms of a response to a sort of terrorist or a shooting type incident, whilst there was no intelligence to suggest that would happen at this event, it was, clearly incumbent upon us to think about that. And it was really obvious that that was not the message that we wanted to proactively use or proactively disseminate prior to or during this event. And if you think about it, crowds of several thousand in terms of people, if we were to have an adverse incident, telling them to run would probably cause more issues than it solves. Especially then if you then think wider and consider that this event ran over 20 plus miles. So what works in terms of one junction may not necessarily work at a junction 100 yards down the road where the whole geography is different. So we came back to a decision that effectively we would trust our experiences that we've already detailed in terms of command responsibilities, and fall back to dynamic decision making in the terms of dealing with a worst case scenario. And there's links here to a lot of widespread academic research which sort of highlights that in terms of mass emergencies, people do tend to help each other. We've got a community, a sort of nation that really looks to effectively old-fashioned values in helping yourselves, helping your neighbours, and probably akin to what we've seen last week down in London on the London Bridge instance again, where people are willing to help each other out. So that was a real important message for us teased out of that day in terms of our tabletop exercise.
Okay, so we've done a lot of planning. We're now getting to the show itself. Friday the 5th of October, we had activity on both Wirral and in Liverpool. It was a working day, it was a school day. So how is that going to impact on travel and transport? Some of the schools decided to give their children a day off. Lots of schools decided to come along and have picnics with the Giants in both Princes Park and the Dips in Wirral. And that tied into the education programme which happened pre the event across all Merseyside schools. Saturday the 6th and Sunday the 7th, we were in Liverpool city centre only. How the events work is you have 3 to 4 hours of activity in the morning, 3 to 4 hours of activity in the afternoon. Prior to that, you have the Giants waking up. Then in the middle of the day, they eat and then sleep. And that allows the Lilliputians to go and have a rest because it's physically demanding. They can't physically work that length of time without eating and sleeping and showering and getting ready for the afternoon. But that still means there's still a show that's taking place while the Giants are sleeping as well. And then just to give you an example of the map, there were 5 maps that we distributed. We distributed 250,000 copies of these maps. We left it as long as we could to allow for changes. we always said that this was the what we hoped would happen, and times were estimated. This is a live event, so things can change. And I know our social media team are listening today to this, but they will tell you that they handled massive amounts of queries from people going, when's the route available? When's the route? When's the route? Where should we go? Because people now know you can't see everything, so you have to pick your spot. This time we also had a chip on each of the giants, which allowed us to have live Google Maps, so people could see in real time where the giants actually were. But as you can see, this Saturday afternoon, and that we've chosen Saturday afternoon's map because you'll see later what actually happened. It was very tight in Liverpool city centre, and we had two giants very, very close to each other.
This is how they move. So this diagram here shows the bubble which forms around each giant. So the blue dots around the outside are called the bénévoles, which is a French term, and they are volunteers. And the way they move is they were holding a piece of hazard tape the full length around, and that created like a sterile area which is unenforced, but that's how they move through the crowds. The little red dot for the net in the middle, that is security. So that's a private security firm hired by the event organisers, Culture Liverpool, and they go around and they keep the place safe in the middle and just keep it moving. There's an advanced guard of teams who will go down and problem solve as they go around corners and make sure people keep back to give sufficient space. So we're inside that, and it's interesting that in 2012 and 2014 we, the police, played quite a large role in that. So we had officers out in high-vis jackets reinforcing that bénévole. Quite good for Merseyside Police. We support these events. They're cracking events to have in the city, but very staff intensive, and you're really left wondering over who has got control of that bénévole. Merseyside Police moving it around, or the security firm working on behalf of Culture Liverpool moving it around. So in this year, 2018, we really reduced that right back. And I was inside the bénévole where I had control of both bénévoles. And it was my job to provide a series of contingencies. So I had enough staff in there to deal with a knife or gun attack, localised disorder, protests. So we had people, officers there trained in protest removal. They had the rudimentary kit to cut through lock-ons and so on. And also we had enough people to, if there was a breakdown in the security arrangements and people were breaching that bubble, then I had sufficient staff to reinforce it until we got some more officers there. So the plan that I gave to Mark as ground commander, these are the 4 contingencies I can deliver. And the rest of it is handed over to Culture Liverpool. So moving on to the content of the bénévole, at the front you've got the giant. In both of them, there are some staff ahead. As I say, they're the ones who do the planning, make sure that the route is clear and that there's enough area for them to move and manoeuvre. Behind that, you've got a pickup truck, like a forklift truck behind the main giant, because they do get up and down, they move around, they move off a vehicle, they start walking, and that's all got to be dealt with by a powered vehicle. A music truck, so quite noisy. There's a live band on there playing music for times and set scenes. And you've got various other props vans and vans related to the event, and then a fridge van. So the rear vehicles at the back were ours. So you've got there a police Land Rover. So as Mark has said, there was a firearms element to this. There have been firearms attacks on previous events, not within Merseyside, thankfully, but across on the continent. So we had to have a contingency for that. We've got some specialist resources. We've got a police dog, just in case we need it, and then a minibus. So I have enough staff in there, M-bus, driving behind, ready to get out to deliver any of those 4 contingencies. So quite complex movement of these convoys. We had handed over the movement of the convoy to Culture Liverpool. It was their responsibility. We're there to provide a service if we need it. And the reason I draw your attention to this is you'll see it again in the later slide, using a different format. So a lot of thought went into this. This has evolved over the 3 years that we did it into quite an efficient and effective self-contained unit to make sure this can move safely through the streets of Liverpool. And here we have some images. So 2012, that's Anfield, Liverpool Football Club, top there, loads of police vehicles. And then in 2014, you can again see, so our protected carriers that we use for public order are yellow. It's unique to Liverpool, and you can see how many there are there. So I would ask you who's controlling that event. There's a heavy police presence, and these don't show. There was a shot from 2012 which showed a giant moving along. Now, about 13 or 14 carriers in convoy behind it, because we'd gone really heavy on resources. We thought it was our responsibility to move it. They're all out deployed at some stage or another. But again, it left you wondering over whose event this was, Merseyside Police or Culture Liverpool. So some aerial shots there showing the contrast between the two, and then the next one you won't have seen any yellow carriers because we use minibuses and a few carriers on the outskirts, so a real change in the tone as required by our Gold Commander.
Okay, so from an operational perspective, we'll go into how the plans from Culture Liverpool actually, dovetailed into everything we've spoken about before. We've mentioned that in 2012 and 2014, one of the biggest learning curves that we had was that when these giants are resting in the period, as Jen's described, when we've had the morning show, they're a great attraction in themselves, because the one great thing that Royal Deluxe do is they do make these giants very lifelike. So they are breathing, for want of a better word, whilst they're actually resting. So they're a spectacle in themselves. So in 2018, we put in Culture Liverpool venue managers, which were our operation event managers who worked on all the major events with us. And we're really lucky that Culture Liverpool has got an extensive team. Plus, there's people that come in to work with us who could fulfil this role. We looked at the medical plan. Obviously, we've detailed it's 21 miles of road closures. So it's not just a case of us bringing a few first aid out. It was working with NWAS, it was working with NHS England. We are affecting, hospitals, we're affecting walk-in centres. As Jen's mentioned, one of the days was a Friday, so there's routine operations going on. So there's a huge amount of work that went on with our partners in the background to ensure that people could still get to hospitals and get to their routine appointments. We were expecting a huge amount of visitors into the city, so City Stars are our volunteers for the city. So we had them at every major transport hub, we had them at every major scene area, so that, again, people, we know that we had visitors come from Australia and America, specifically to come and watch these giants. The one thing that we hadn't mentioned is that 2 weeks before the actual show, Royal Deluxe announced that this was going to be their last giant show. It's been to 22 countries before, and now 2 weeks before the actual show, they announced that this will be the last time that these giants actually come out into the public, domain. So that increased the visitor numbers significantly, and especially, international visitors coming to us. We've detailed, and as you can see from the photos, we were at New Brighton, and then on the Liverpool side, there was, we were down near the docks quite a lot. So we had to have a huge water safety plan that involved RNLI, involved inshore rescue, and that was key, because obviously, we hadn't really been near the water specifically in previous shows, and definitely not within, the Wirral and on the beach. Lost children was a huge area of planning that we spoke to Mark and Jonathan about in depth, because obviously it wasn't a normal gig where we're just on one greenfield site. It's 21 miles of route. So what do we do if we have a lost child? Do we stay in the same place? Do we take the child with us along the parade routes? So we ended up having about 20 lost children welfare teams who were there with a specific plan. We had 4,000 wristbands we gave out to parents that they could put around their child's wrist with their phone numbers on. We did a huge social media campaign beforehand about taking note of what your child was wearing. There was so much that went into the background, because this was a real heavily, family orientated event. In terms of staff welfare, again, we're asking our teams to walk for 21 miles. So we did a lot of work in the background between ourselves and police and all the other blue light services that were with us, in terms of looking after the staff, because we were on 12, 16-hour days by this point. So looking after the teams. It didn't necessarily go to plan, if we're being honest. And on the Friday, we were in a situation where we had 300 packed lunches that didn't make it over to the Wirral. So then that was a huge negotiation with the teams on the ground, because they've been working in the rain that day, and suddenly we're not able to feed them because we haven't got the packed lunches to them. So there were some things that did not quite go to plan, even after 18 months of pulling this together. And then accessibility, we did a load of work on in terms of those who might want quiet time, those who don't want to be in huge crowds. So we had sessions within St George's Hall where people could come and actually be next to the giants if they didn't want to be within those large crowds. We had accessible viewing platforms. We went down to the degree of having water next to the giants' sleeping scenes, where we provided water for guide dogs. So there was a huge amount that we did in 2018 that really upped the plans on 12 and 14. And then I think we've touched on already the filming and the drones. In terms of traffic and transport, it's 21 miles, but it was over two districts, for want of a better word, which meant that we had to have 3 traffic management companies in because what we couldn't do, especially on the Friday, was guarantee that teams would be able to move from the Wirral to Liverpool city centre, because anybody that knows the area, that requires going through one of two tunnels or across by boat. So we had to have 3 different traffic management companies in, one for the Liverpool side, one for the Wirral side, and then one as a contingency. And that did work, but the enormity of that meant that we actually had to go and get some more traffic cones physically made, because we were using up every single traffic cone in the area. We were working with Highways England because we were having to use the VMS signs as far out as Birmingham to let people know about the closures and the impacts of the Giants event, that what the traffic would be during this period. And then obviously the stewarding plan. We worked with our stewarding partners, our traffic management company Paramount, and they went and got a lot of their staff CSAS trained, so that they could actually then take over a lot of the role that the police had done on road closures in 2012 and 2014, all going back to this change in the role of the police within events. We've said it was a different security climate, so we had to look at hostile vehicle mitigation, which obviously was for vehicle-borne attacks. So we did a lot of work with the police and counter-terrorism teams on what we needed to do and positions where, we needed to put vehicles, the weight-bearing bollards, not to the extreme of Geneva, but we did have to look at, some planning. But then there was, again, certain things that were taken out of our hands. Northern rail strikes were threatened during the weekend, and I think we did have some of them on the Friday. And then bus companies going out of business on the Wirral. So the Wirral having one of their major bus transport providers going out of business on that Friday. That's the kind of things that we couldn't actually foresee. But it did mean that because of the Merseyrail plans, the consultation, the Major Event Transport Board, that we did have the people next to us in event control and also in the transport hubs who could work with us, and we could quickly get messages out. And this was all down to the learning of Lime Street in 2014, where unfortunately some people had been left on the platforms and couldn't actually get home on the evening of the Saturday that year. So we had taken that learning from that year and moved it forward as to putting those plans in place so that the transport was more robust. So we've started to take you through the show delivery to give you a picture of what that actually looked like. Event control was in the Joint Command Centre in Aintree, and there was about 40 people, excluding Merseyside Police, actually in that event control with us. They were ourselves, with our stewarding company, our traffic management company, our production team, safety team, the traffic stewards. We had our social media team with us, we had the press team, and then obviously everybody from North West Ambulance, St John's, and then you put all the police control on top of that. So it was absolutely huge in terms of resourcing and those partners that had been on this 18-month journey with us, and they were now sat with us controlling this huge event over 4 days. We had some issues with what Royal Deluxe wanted to do on the day, and there'd been a breakdown in communication, especially in terms of the route. And as Jen said, those maps that we produced actually had the timings on them of where and when we thought those Giants would be. What we found on the Saturday was that the Giants were actually, one of the Giants in particular, was moving a lot quicker than had been expected. And what Jonathan had taken you through with going through the bubble was that in the background, myself and Jen had been championing that the first thing that the public should see was the actual Giants. What we were trying to all move away from was that heavy police response that we'd had in 12 and 14. We wanted the artistic side to be the first thing that people actually saw. However, what happened on the Saturday was there was a quick dynamic change and discussions in event control, because then I had to go cap in hand to ask if we could actually stop the police vehicles in front of the Giants, because we actually needed to slow things down and stop the Giants from moving, because we could see that 2 of them were actually going to come together way ahead of schedule on the Saturday morning, which was going to cause huge crowd issues. So we had to do some very, very quick decision making within event control to work together and make that happen. For us, huge learning curves, because our radios failed on the Saturday, and you'll see a bit later on how impactful that was for us, because there's 400 odd radios, and we now know why they failed. But obviously, in this situation, when we're in the middle of delivery, there's not a lot that we could do to actually fix that, because our radio company who were with us couldn't fix it because it was interference from additional DAB antennae that had been put on next to ours. We actually relied on WhatsApp. We had a WhatsApp group of 55 of us on it, and we're at the stage where mobile phones aren't working because it's so busy within the actual city centre. But for some reason, and thank God it did, the WhatsApp was still working. So we were communicating with our team via WhatsApp. What we did have was, obviously, the police were still on their radio system, and so this is where the partnership really came into play. On one of many occasions, was that we were able to work with Mark and Jonathan and the teams on the ground so that everybody still knew what was happening, and working together. There was some issues with vehicles on the route. So obviously we've had 21 miles of road closures during the 4 days, and there was still some vehicles that had parked on the route on the Saturday afternoon. So it meant that we actually had to have tow trucks on standby to move them out of the way. And it's the best money we've ever spent, to be honest, because there was 3 vehicles. If we hadn't got them moved, it just wouldn't have happened. And on that side, we've got the Saturday, but I'll let Jonathan speak about that as to what actually came into play on the Saturday of the event. But this slide here, we've put this in just so that you can see how event control was actually working and how we were dovetailing into the police. Because obviously we were running the event control with 40 partners in JCC, with all of these partners feeding into us. So a huge amount of communication, a huge amount of trust by this point between all parties, and a huge amount of planning that is now, I say 12, 18 months for, most of us, that is now, resting on the actual delivery of the show.
So, Rachel, down in Sussex Police, we have noted your questions popping up here, and we'll come back to them at the end. The slide now on the screen is a visual of the complexities, if you like, and the dynamics of the police command element of this. And as I've said earlier, the experience of commanders was absolutely essential, I believe, to the success of this event. Now, of particular note here is that, particularly on the operational side of the policing aspect, is that pretty much all of the commanders are effectively dual qualified. So whilst I was the event silver, I'm also a firearms commander. The firearms commander is both a bronze and a silver. Jonathan, whilst bronze for this event, is a silver commander, and vice versa. So we had resilience built in effectively every aspect of this structure. So then, moving on to the days of the events themselves, it's fair to say they were fairly challenging at times. And as I've said earlier, part of our extensive planning was ensuring that we had sufficient policing resilience in place throughout. I've already talked about the football event that we had that weekend, and that we had the likelihood of the Irish parades, and we always had protests that we were aware of some time out. But even at the week of the event itself, we were getting intelligence about potential protests at fast food venues and at armed forces venues, which we had to deal with. And then beyond that then, we had, if you look at the picture in the middle there, that's a free runner. I don't know how familiar people are with free runners. It's these people who do all these crazy moves running up and down high buildings and structures that most people wouldn't dream of doing. So we actually had those, a small group of them from abroad, turn up at Anfield Football Stadium on the Thursday night. Luckily they were arrested, but clearly my concern was, are they here to target and get the publicity out of the wider event? Have they been able to scale one of the giants and fill the flag, for argument's sake? Did we have the capabilities built in, which we did from Jonathan's team, to deal with them? So we had to be proactive in terms of what we did with them whilst they were in custody to negate them coming to the event. And then in the bottom right-hand corner there is a picture of a lorry cab. Now, on the Saturday morning, as we got into event control, I was actually handed that picture saying this lorry is stolen and it's been doing the rounds of Merseyside overnight. Whilst there was no intelligence to say that that vehicle was obviously a threat to the event, clearly my initial thoughts were back to the various events that had happened internationally and how vehicles, and particularly lorries, I think over in France, had been used as a means of attacking crowded places. So again, whilst the lorry, it turns out, came nowhere near the event, we certainly had to put measures in place which enhanced our sort of thinking around what would happen if it did, and our state of alertness, if you like. And it's fair to say that Sue's face sort of almost hit the ground when I showed her that picture and told her what was happening. We also had issues around a bus company, so one of the transport providers did go bankrupt the day before the event, which provided some logistical issues. But this is where we then link it back to the benefits of having a really challenging tabletop exercise, and all those effectively event paper feeds that we had. Pretty much they all bore out in some form or other during the event itself. So we were, really appreciative of the fact that we've been so challenging to each other in the planning phases.
So we've talked about the planning of the event, the structures, and we've noted the questions. Thank you again, Rachel from Sussex Police, around the role of Gold and the council, and we'll answer those. Mark will answer those at the end. So this is a bit around, so we planned the event's going okay, we've shown some of the logistical challenges around the event. This next stage is showing how that all came into practice and how it was good. So my role was bronze, so I'm the ground commander for the event, and my role is to deliver Mark's plan and make sure this event runs well from a police side of view. So I've done the previous two events. I've done the first one as a sub-bronze and the second one as a shadow silver. And then this one was mine as a ground commander. So location, we had two barrels moving at any one time. So one was on the Wirral for some of it, one was on the main sort of Liverpool side of things. And then on the main day, they were together moving around the city in tandem with huge crowds. And Sue's already spoken about how those crowds moved from one giant to another, and also how much work the council's social media team had done around publicising where it'd be at certain times and where there were certain events. And the crowd very much learned from that around where set pieces would be. So it's great to see the giant moving, really impactful, but it's also very good to see the set pieces because they had a bit of humour to them, and some of them were quite complex. And you would see the Lilliputians really earning their money, really dismounting, moving it around, and making it do various things like going over a really high washing line. In 1 year, that was to the Mission Impossible music, which is very good. And so there's one of the crowds. So if anybody, obviously clearly this is a webinar, but you can see that's the back of my head there on top of a fire engine. That's not me with my hands over my eyes. That's one of our sergeants who's deployed to the event. And you can see the crowd. So this one was a set piece where the fire brigade would give the giant water. Big funnel goes into his mouth. Fire brigade on that engine will go up an elevated aerial platform and put water into the giant. Been done numerous times before, really, really good. And the left-hand picture shows the scale of that and the distance. What we found there was the crowd had learned, and this was near the end of the event, and they'd seen the aerial platform being put in place, and the crowd started to build and build and build, and the giants weren't there when it got to a really quite a large size. The geography there, you can see it's on the main strand which runs along the waterfront. So on the left-hand side of that photograph on the left, you've got the Mersey. So clearly there's capacity issues there. The right-hand side, you've got quite a heavy stone wall, and there's a natural elevation to that area. So if you're walking towards it, you can't see that there's a crowd in the middle until you're in. And the way the giants move is they'll get huge crowds around them. So I think we estimated about 80,000 people were there static by the time the giants arrived. They were supposed to arrive at the same time, and each one would bring a crowd of about 1,000 people with it. So you're bringing huge numbers of people into a huge crowd with very limited space in which to move. So my role was to deal with this. So I was passing by. I wouldn't normally have stopped at a set piece event because this is building up about an hour before the giants got there. But I just happened to be there on top of that fire engine watching the crowd build. So there were some challenges within Silver. So CCTV was operational. The helicopter downlink had gone. Sue's already spoken about the challenges within the radio not working properly for them. Our airwave radios were still working, but it's very, very noisy. They have music trucks with them, really dense, and it was really quite hard to communicate other than through hand signals. And so it really was quite an honest. I've known Mark for some time. We both, I think, proved ourselves in various events. And it was an honest conversation where I said, look, Mark, the giants aren't here yet. but the crowds are massive, and I think they're going to struggle to get them through. Now, Royal Deluxe, they do the event and they have a set agenda. We've spoken about the times. They're very good at predicting how long they're going to take. And they're very hard things to slow down, nor really should we slow them down, because it's part of the scene. We've made commitments to people. But it really was me saying to Mark, listen, if we don't do something here, I think when the Giants come, we're going to have issues. And I think we need to start putting some tactics into place. So all of the staff that we used, we made the decision to use public order trained staff. There was no real public order threat to it, but they're used to training in teams. And what we started to do was putting some public order tactics in place, some closed cordons, some filter cordons all around in the periphery, not really visible to the people who are there, just to slow those numbers down and really slow the Giants. So a bit of a tense number of phone calls between Mark and myself, a period of 10 minutes of silence coming from Silver, where they worked out what they were going to do. And Mark, again, as he said all the way through, you know, whose gig is this? And it was theirs, which was a relief to us. But the whole way through, had to be ready to step in. So this is a public safety event, and we have a role where we can take this event if we need to. But there are huge ramifications. Are we trained? You know, Mark and I have no formal qualifications, public and silver, but in event management, health and safety management. We're both IOSH, but is this the right level? There is a safety officer who was saying, yes, you've got huge crowds there, but on the CCTV, we can see that there is room behind them. There's room to the left of them. You just can't see it. So a real level of trust there between Mark and myself. So this was the PR shot. So you can see the Giant there. You can see the elevated platform with the fire officers on top of it, and then just at the base of that ladder you can see myself, my TACAD and my logist, and we really were scribbling quite hard, and we were preparing for the worst around what we'd done, what we hadn't done. And you can just see huge crowds of people. Iconic three buildings there, iconic parts of Liverpool's frontage, the river behind it, and I think a fantastic shot which just shows the scale and nature. But that crowd wasn't supposed to be there, so we have some real concerns around it. So it's around keeping your nerve, keeping that conversation going with the event organisers, and trusting each other that we can deliver what we're going to deliver. And this really is where the tabletops came in. So the tabletops, the planning, all of those things that we had done really came into a fore for this one. And here you can see the crowd. So we talked about the reality. So I could see an incredibly dense crowd. And having done the policing events course, which Mark and I had done specifically for this, again, in the January before the event, they teach you about density of crowd. So I can't remember the exact formula, but it's a certain number of people per metre squared. Well, I think we're in excess of that. And this was an uncomfortable time. But although it was uncomfortable, we really had to reflect on the tabletops, the planning, the event, and the extremely good work done by Culture Liverpool, and understand that the risk here was actually quite limited. So my TACAD, Michael, who I'd forgotten his family were in the crowd, so he was dealing with that as well, just turned to me and said, look at the people and look what they're doing. So yes, it's very dense. So we started really focusing in on people, and they were all facing the Giants. They had their cameras out, their phones, they were holding children up. Not because it was busy, but so they could get a better view. And people really were enthralled with what the Giant was doing and how it was moving. And yeah, there was a couple of people there who were catching our attention because people had passed out within the crowd. And St John's Ambulance did a great job going in their teams and looking after those people. And a few people were saying, look, it's getting really quite busy here. We offered them ways out. People wanted to stay to watch the Giants. So that really set the scene for us that although uncomfortable, this was still safe. So the safety officer was looking at some CCTV. He can see the bigger picture. The plans we put in place have stopped more people coming in and ingressing into the area and allowing people to go out. Culture Liverpool had spoken to the organisers and changed the route so that they wouldn't come together at the same time, but one would come and do the set piece and move through, and the next one would move through. And it was a case of everyone really remaining really calm and focused on the event. And the people just enjoying themselves and watching this Giant, and that's where the preparation really came into value for us.
So we've reflected a lot, both during this event and since, particularly as there's other large-scale events occurring fairly regularly within Merseyside. And what we've found collectively is that there was significant benefit in terms of the long-term partnerships specifically built up between the Liverpool Culture Company and Merseyside Police. key individuals who've now known each other for quite some time and who trust each other. Akin to, or aligned to that is the communication and the planning, the depth of which was absolutely off the scale in terms of this event. I know the extent of the documents that the ladies had from their perspective, that I had from my command log, really, really intrusive and extensive. And I'm comfortable that if we ever needed to, we could justify all of the actions and decisions that we took. You know, you've got to remember that this is against the backdrop in Merseyside in particular. It's been out in the media a lot again lately around Mr. Duckenfield and the Hillsborough disasters. You know, crowds crushing, very, very emotive locally. So it's, you know, it's one that we certainly did not want to get wrong. And I'm confident in, you know, the depth of that communication and planning throughout that 14-16 month period that we were together. We've talked about the command perspective on the ground, and again, trusting each other, that experience over numerous years of working different events. It all comes together to inform your decision making. Right back to that initial slide that we showed 3 or 4 slides in around the decision making model, and how we're continually spinning that in terms of making and holding you sort of on the line in terms of decision making. And Jonathan's just touched on it now. You know, there really is a need to hold your nerve at times with an event of this scale. It does get a bit uncomfortable, but that's why you do all the training. That's why you work so well together, and that's why you know, you reflect and learn from your previous experiences, which were absolutely key to the success here.
And moving on to the last couple of slides. So if you go right back to where we talked about the configuration of the bubble, where you had the outer limit of volunteers holding tape, reinforced by security, and the role of the police delivering those 4 contingencies: knife and gun attack, localised disorder, localised protest, and also a breakdown of the community, the security arrangements. And this really draws back to the initial point regarding the experience of the commanders. So if you look on the right-hand corner, you've got, on the right-hand side, you've got the little boy giant moving through, you've got the Lilliputians at the front. Because it was quite dense there, you can see quite a lot of street traffic furniture. We've got a few officers out. You've got a armoured police vehicle on the right side providing the firearms contingency, and then you've got the blue, the people who've seen best at the front, and also in the line on the right side, the blue jackets, which were the security, the Beneval, so that's volunteers, and they had to tape, and that's how it's moving around. If you turn to the left, so that picture is Liverpool welcome home, welcome parade after they won the Champions League. So I was ground bronze for that. We had the same team, Sue was involved in it, same team delivering it, and exactly the same tactic. So you've got there a movement of vehicles through a densely crowded group of people, and you've got security there. They're wearing high vis, but they've got blue sleeves. You can see them just to the front right of the vehicle. That's FGH, the security firm, and police reinforcing it and providing again those 4 contingencies: gun and knife attack, localised disorder, localised protest, and a breakdown of that security arrangements. But you've got a completely different crowd. So on the right hand side, people interested to see it, ecstatic, good-natured. I doubt very much any of them that come to this inebriated, or why would they? They come from all over the country, and they're compliant, and they want it to move through and see it work. The left-hand side, you've got a group of very proud, excited people from Liverpool and beyond. Lots of smoke, lots of noise, and they want to get as close as they possibly can to the players on top of that bus. So same tactics, same command team. It's another safe event, but a different signage. So you've got people climbing there at heights. We're not going to ask them to get down, because if we do, we take ownership of their safety. But we have to tell people underneath them, listen, there's someone who's been drinking, who's sat on a traffic light, and if he falls on you, he's going to cause you some damage. So a totally different tone, but again, another safe, massive event. And these are mega events that Culture Liverpool are delivering time and time again. Just the 2 things, same tactics used in each. And really around the experience of the commanders. So we're fortunate in Merseyside doing these mega events and things of this nature. We've got commanders now who've worked with Culture Liverpool, and it's really fused that silver room into a proper functioning partnership operation and mechanism for delivering these events, where if you look at it really really cuttingly, you could probably say that some of the boundaries have been blurred, but there was a common purpose: delivering the event, but more importantly, keeping people safe, and that's what we're doing. So this is just to illustrate tactics used in one event. The Giants use the same multi-partner tactics in another one, and I have no doubt at some stage. So that concludes the webinar. Thank you very much. And it's really just around some questions. So the questions have been coming in, and thank you for those. So the first one is from Rachel Thomas. It says, hello from Sussex Police. Hello from Merseyside Police to you. Was there any cost recovery police resources? If so, how did you establish the SPS, the Officer Dedicated Event versus police in the city? And we're interested in this because the event doesn't appear to have a closed event space, e.g. fencing. So the second bit first, there was some fencing. So on some days, on the final day, there was some fencing set down the Strand to keep people back and allow the Giants to move. But in the main of it, as you've seen the pictures, the crowd are there all around it. So over to the Field Commander, Mark.
So in terms of the question is about SPS, so effectively policing, paying for private policing effectively. We didn't go down that route of using SPS, conscious of all the recent court cases relevant to that. But what we did have was a voluntary contribution to policing costs that sat outside of SPS, made kindly to us by the Liverpool Council. And I think the ladies will confirm that was, clearly they have to be accountable to the public purse effectively, but there was some recognition there to the significant impact upon policing capabilities in the Merseyside region for that 4-day period.
Okay, thank you. And same again from Sussex Police. Question here for Liverpool City Council. So if you remember, there was 2 slides. We showed the second slide Mark talked through, which was the police command structure. The one before that was the LCC command structure. The question is, we noticed Liverpool City Council Gold, at the top of the event structure diagram, were they in overcharge and were they responsible for the event? So that one to Sue.
This was something we had at great discussions, over the 18-month planning period. And I think Jonathan highlighted it on how we'd approached it in 2012 and 2014 with the police resourcing. We very much agreed at an early stage that it was Culture Liverpool's gig. And it became a bit of a joke between us. Mark said
no
it
joke.
Was several times, it's your gig. But, that was the premise that we ran the event. So I was running on the LCC silver level. And then we had a colleague, Colleen Martin, one of our assistant directors, who was our LCC gold. And Colleen's role in the council is very much, Resilience Forum is working with emergency services on a day-to-day basis. So having that level of experience, working with us and having her sat in gold during this 4 days was absolutely invaluable. But, to kind of reiterate, it was very much agreed from the very early stages that, Culture Liverpool had brought Royal Deluxe into the city and it was our event.
Okay, and a few more questions. So there's one from Molly. I can't hear anything whatsoever except a slight buzzing. That was us talking. I hope you stayed, Molly. I hope you got what you needed. Again, this will be recorded and you can download it. Another question, which will be for the council, I think. This is from Rob. I would be interested to know how you manage crowd numbers for the event to ensure you are not over capacity.
Again, so we've kind of touched on that with the experience of having the Giants in the city twice before. The key thing that we tried to work with Royal Deluxe from a very, very early stage was that as much as possible, we had 2 separate routes for the Giants. And I think, to be honest, we proved that really. And obviously, that you can see the last slide with those crowd numbers. That is what happened when the 2 Giants came together. Now, we always knew we'd have huge crowds when the 2 Giants came together. We didn't expect this level of crowds. However, that was the premise during most of the event, was to try and spread the audience out by having the 2 separate routes and then having different areas where the resting, like at lunchtimes and evenings would take place as well, again, to spread the crowds. And obviously on the Friday, we did that by having, one of the Giants on the Wirral and working with Wirral Council. So that was very key for us. And that was, again, a lot of the learning. And we'd seen that in other countries where there was just one Giant. And we saw how dense the crowds could come, in those areas. So it was really trying to, use that as the premise of our event management plan.
Okay, thank you. The next one, which is for Jen. So this one's Helen. Thank you for your question. Helen, how close to the event does your tabletop session take place?
It took place on the 11th of September, so that was just over 3 weeks before the event. And we were tied to make sure that Jeff Havart, the production manager from Royal Deluxe, had arrived in Liverpool by that point. So he needed to be at that event to make sure that Royal Deluxe's planning and the city's planning was all aligned. So about just over 3 weeks beforehand.
And then a final one, which I think I'll put to Silva, to Mark. So the importance of the experience of commanders has been a key theme to success. How would you adapt it if experienced commanders had not been so readily available? And that's from Martin.
I don't know when that question came in or if I've already potentially answered it, but we built in sufficient resilience at literally all levels of the operational aspect of it from police command so that it was interchangeable. But beyond that, we also then had a night duty Silver who effectively looked after things and babysat things overnight whilst we'd gone home, and she would have been available to us. And again, she was or is dual qualified in terms of bronze and silver. And then beyond that, we've got what we call a force duty officer structure who've got some command capabilities as well. But luckily within Merseyside, we've got a relatively big cadre of policing commanders that some of the forces I recognise don't have. So, you know, clearly we would have had considerations around potentially bringing in mutual aid, etc. But we didn't need to go down that route locally, in that we had sufficient capability deliberately built in to this event.
Okay, and thank you for all these questions. We do appreciate the nature of it. And the last one is from Jen. Well done to everyone. Thank you very much. Big question, would you do it again? And I think I know the answer to this.
I think Jen's best place to do this because Jen has been the project manager 3 times now.
I think my line is always, it's a bit like childbirth. The farther away you get from this, the easier the event seems. We are incredibly lucky to have done it 3 times. I do remember after time 1 I said no, never again, but after show 2 I said definitely. I think the decision's been taken out of our hands because the Giants have been retired. Royal Lux are looking to do another Giant, build another Giant, but to do 1 Giant in Liverpool, we've shown that probably wouldn't be safe for us to just go from 4 Giants to 1, so it's probably been taken out of our hands. 3, I think, is a good number to stop on.
And that concludes our webinar. So thank you for coming in. Thanks to Sussex Police and other police forces that are involved in this. And thanks to Emergency Planning College for hosting it. As we've said before, this is now recorded. It will be put on the website in a couple of weeks. And our details on the board there. So if you have any questions, really do feel free to email any of us around the policing or the council side of things. And I hope you have a good day. Thank you very much.